Ladies and gentlemen, look at me for a second because I'm not talking to the crowd. I'm talking to you. You know exactly what you should be doing. And every day you choose not to do it, not because you can't, but because comfort keeps winning. You don't lack potential. You lack follow through. You don't lack vision. You've lost trust in yourself because every time you promise discipline and choose ease instead, something inside you breaks. Every skip morning, every delayed move, every excuse you dressed up as logic. You want confidence, but you keep betraying your word. You want power, but you keep avoiding pressure. You want to feel like that person again, the one who executed without excuses. But right now, your actions don't back up your identity. And that tension you feel, that's not stress. That's the gap between who you say you are and who you're proving yourself to be. This isn't motivation. This is a confrontation, and it starts right now. You think the problem is that people don't see you, but that's not the problem. The problem is you need them to see you, that hunger for validation, that quiet desperation for approval, that addiction to the notification, the comment, the share, the applause. If you don't confront it, it will sabotage everything you claim you're called to build. Because the moment the room stays quiet, the moment the post gets no reaction, the moment nobody praises what you poured out, your energy shifts, your mood crashes, and you start questioning the very assignment God already gave you. And that collapse is the evidence. You're not operating from calling anymore. You're operating from craving. You say you're doing this for God. You say you're serving. You say you're walking in purpose. But watch what happens when the response doesn't match your effort. Watch what happens when you preach and people don't run to you afterward. Watch what happens when you post something you felt was anointed and it lands like nothing. Your face stays calm, but your spirit tightens. Your peace disappears. Your mind starts negotiating. Maybe I'm not effective. Maybe I'm not called. Maybe I missed it. And you think you're being humble, but you're not. You're being dependent. You're allowing human reaction to become the measure of divine assignment. And that is a dangerous place to live because when you let the crowd decide whether you were obedient, you will eventually perform for the crowd instead of obeying the call. You'll start preaching for claps. You'll start creating for likes. You'll start serving for gratitude. And you may still say God, but your nervous system will be trained by people. Let me tell you something that hit me hard. I was preparing a message, notes spread out, Bible open, heart focused. I felt clarity. I felt fire. I felt that conviction that says this is for someone. I delivered that message with everything I had. I poured out truth. I gave them tools. I opened the word. I walked off feeling like I had just handed people keys. And then I made a mistake. I pulled out my phone. I started checking, scrolling, refreshing, and it was silent. No flood of messages. No, that changed my life. No tags. No excitement, just nothing. And I felt that old thing creep in, the subtle doubt that tries to pretend it's wisdom. Maybe it wasn't that good. Maybe nobody got it. Maybe you missed the mark. And I had to stop myself right there because I realized I was looking for people to validate what God had already confirmed. I was asking humans to sign off on what heaven had assigned. And when you do that, when you let human reaction become your scoreboard, you will lose your mind. You will lose your fire. You will lose your focus because crowds are inconsistent, moods shift, and people are distracted. But your assignment isn't supposed to be fueled by their attention. Your assignment is supposed to be sustained by obedience. Here's the real issue. You're not just discouraged, you're addicted. You're addicted to being noticed. And I'm not saying that to shame you. I'm saying it to expose the trap. Because until you call it what it is, you'll keep spiritualizing what is actually bondage. Every time you refresh, every time you check comments, every time you scan the room to see who's nodding, every time you look for someone's face to confirm, you did well. You are training your brain to depend on external reward. And when external reward becomes your fuel, your internal fire starts dying because now you're not serving from conviction. You're serving from compulsion. You're not pouring from strength. You're pouring from insecurity. And insecurity will never sustain a ministry. It will only shrink it. It will make you avoid risk. It will make you compromise. It will make you chase what works instead of what's true. You want to be used by God, but you're checking stats like an addict checks a screen. You want authority, but you're emotionally dependent on whether people like what you posted. You want power, but you keep leaking it. Every time you go searching for applause, and listen, you cannot serve two masters. You cannot worship in the secret place and chase clout in the public space. You cannot say God is enough while secretly demanding the algorithm to validate you and the exhaustion you feel after you serve. Sometimes it's not because you gave too much. Sometimes it's because you gave it for the wrong reason. You weren't just pouring out. You were leaking out because a part of you was serving God and another part of you was trying to secure approval.
Let me explain what's happening in your brain, because this is not only spiritual, it's psychological, it's neurological. And if you understand the system, you can break the system. Every time you receive a comment, a share, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical, the thing that keeps you reaching, checking, refreshing, craving. The same system that gets hijacked by gambling, endless scrolling, sugar, quick wins can also hijack ministry when your reward is tied to response. So you preach, and if the response is high, your brain gets rewarded. If the response is low, your brain feels withdrawal. And withdrawal doesn't just feel like sadness. It feels like meaninglessness. It feels like I'm wasting my time. It feels like I'm not called. Not because God left you, but because your reward system got trained to need human reaction. You think you're building a ministry, but if you're not careful, you're building dependency, and dependency will destroy you faster than opposition ever could. So here's the first tool: simple, brutal, freeing. The 72 hard blackout rule. Every time you serve publicly, preach, teach, post, lead, do not check responses for 72 hours. None, zero, no scanning, no refreshing, no asking people, how was it? No fishing for feedback. Serve and step back, deliver and detach. Because you're training your nervous system to decouple obedience from applause. You're teaching yourself, I can do what God asked me to do without needing immediate human reward. And the first 24 hours will feel uncomfortable. It will feel like withdrawal, because it is. Your brain will try to convince you it's wise to check, responsible to monitor, smart to track. But sometimes what we call wisdom is just addiction wearing a suit. So you push through day 2, something shifts. Day 3, you feel lighter, freer, less controlled. And that's when you start becoming dangerous, not to people, but to the trap. Because now you're moving from internal authority instead of external approval. Now that's one layer of applause addiction. But there's another layer that destroys public ministry: quietly platform over person. Somewhere along the way, many of us stop building people and start building an image. We stop caring about depth and start obsessing over reach. We start curating a brand of ministry while the real, messy, unglamorous work sits untouched. And deep down, you know it, you feel it when you hit post and still feel empty. You feel it when you gain followers and still feel dry. You feel it when you craft the perfect caption, but your heart is bone tired, because you can create ministry content while avoiding actual ministry. And the tragedy isn't that you're doing the wrong thing by mistake. The tragedy is that, and you keep doing it anyway, because the platform gives you something real. People can't always give control, distance, safety, the illusion of impact without the discomfort of intimacy. I remember sitting in a coffee shop once, laptop open, editing a post, tweaking, adjusting, polishing, making sure it looked right. And I looked up and saw someone nearby, heavy posture, tired eyes, carrying something. I felt the nudge, close the laptop, ask if they're okay for a split second. I almost did, but I didn't. I stayed in my seat. I kept editing. I kept building. I told myself I was doing important work. I convinced myself that reaching thousands online was more valuable than reaching one person in real life. And I posted, and I got likes, and I got comments, and I walked out feeling productive. But on the drive home, I couldn't shake the image of that face, and I realized I chose the platform over the person, the brand over the body. I was building something that looked like ministry, but didn't feel like Jesus, because Jesus didn't build platforms. He built people. He didn't scale his image. He sacrificed his comfort. He didn't avoid the messy parts. He walked into them. So let me tell you the truth that most of us avoid. You can preach about transformation while avoiding transformation. You can talk about discipleship while avoiding discipling. You can be known for impact while refusing the phone call at midnight, refusing the hospital visit, refusing the slow, uncomfortable process of walking with someone who's breaking, because discipleship doesn't trend, and that's why the platform becomes tempting. Psychologically, there's a bias that explains this, the spotlight effect. It's the tendency to overestimate how much people are actually paying attention to you. So you spend energy managing perception, perfecting the image, because you believe everyone is watching, but they're not. Most people scroll in 2 seconds. Most people forget by evening. And while you obsess over how you're perceived, real people near you are bleeding. They don't need another inspirational post. They need presence, prayer, a phone call, a visit, someone to sit in the valley with them. That kind of work happens in the unseen. No recording, no clapping, no comments, and that's exactly why the ego hates it. So here's the second tool, the one nameless act rule. Every week, do one act of service that nobody will ever know about. Not your spouse, not your team, not your pastor, not your journal. Nobody, just you and God. Pay for someone's groceries and walk away. Send a quiet gift anonymously. Serve someone privately. Help without credit. Bless without documentation. Because when you can serve in anonymity, you rebuild the muscle of invisible faithfulness. You break the addiction to recognition. You strip the ego from the offering. First, it will feel like it didn't count. That feeling is not humility. It's ego withdrawal. That's your need for recognition dying. And that death is wholly due this consistently. And you become someone whose ministry doesn't need a stage, someone who doesn't measure success by traffic, but by transformation, someone who can discern this person needs a conversation more than they need a sermon. Now the next layer, discipline. You want power. You want anointing. You want authority. You pray for breakthrough, but you keep stepping over the door that is already open. And that door is daily discipline. I remember a season where I was begging God to use me, staying up late, praying, pouring my heart out, asking for doors, asking for influence, asking for breakthrough. I felt intensity. I felt conviction. I went to bed thinking something is about to shift. Alarm went off at 5 a.m. I hit snooze. I justified it. I'll pray later. I'll read after I check my phone. I'll do it when I feel awake. And by the time I opened my Bible, it was noon. Mind scattered, heart distracted. Day already hijacked by everyone else's agenda. And it hit me. I wasn't waiting on God. God was waiting on me. I was praying for doors to open while refusing to walk through the one he already opened. You want anointing without discipline, authority without the altar, power without the price. But every person who carried power built a private rhythm. They didn't seek God only when convenient. They made the secret place non-negotiable. And that private discipline became fuel for public strength. So here's the third tool, the first -15 lock. For 30 days, the first 15 minutes after waking are non-negotiable. No phone, no social media, no messages, no noise, just scripture, silence, surrender. 15 minutes sounds small, but that's why it works. You can do it on your worst day. And when you stack 15-minute wins, you're not only building a habit, you're building identity. You become someone who doesn't negotiate with obedience. And over time, you stop stepping into ministry empty. You stop operating on fumes because public power is supposed to be overflow, not performance. Now we reach the deepest layer, fear of obscurity. You say you've surrendered. You say you trust God, but you're terrified of being hidden, terrified of being forgotten, terrified of a season where nobody celebrates you. So you say yes to God, but with conditions. Use me, but don't make me invisible. And that fear is a ceiling because resurrection power only comes to people willing to die, to ego, to control, to visibility addiction. I once sat with a mentor and poured out all my plans, all my moves, all my strategies. He listened quietly and then asked, "You afraid of the tomb, aren't you?" I didn't understand at first. He said, "You want resurrection, you want influence, but you're terrified of the season where God buries you, where he strips your platform, hides your name, removes the spotlight, so he can build your character where nobody can clap." And it exposed me. I was willing to work for God, sacrifice for God, serve for God, but I wasn't willing to be forgotten by people for God. I wasn't willing to release the need to be remembered. And until I released it, I kept burning out trying to hold what God was asking me to surrender. Psychologically, there's a framework that helps name this fear, terror management theory. The idea that people chase recognition because they fear insignificance. They build platforms not only for impact, but to silence the terror of being forgotten. But biblical significance has never depended on visibility. Jesus lived 30 years in obscurity before 3 years of ministry. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. Joseph spent years in a pit in prison. Paul disappeared into hidden seasons, and those hidden places didn't weaken them. They forged them. The unseen is where ego dies. The unseen is where dependency becomes real. The unseen is where God tests whether he can trust you with more. So here's the fourth tool, The surrender statement ritual. For 21 days every morning before anything else, speak this out loud. God, I release my need to be remembered. Use me in the shadows or the spotlight. I trust you with my story. Out loud, not in your head, because you're not just saying words, you're retraining your nervous system. You're reprogramming your identity. You're teaching your heart to find safety and obedience, not recognition. At first, it will feel forced, like you're losing control, because your ego is losing control. But somewhere around day 10, day 14, something shifts. You check less. You crave less. You panic less when you're unseen. You don't spiral when you're not celebrated. And that's when you become dangerous in the best way, because now you can go anywhere God sends you, seen or unseen, praised or ignored, and your fire stays the same. Now let me put all of this together into a single call. Public ministry is powerful, but only when it flows from private strength. If your fuel is applause, you will burn out. If your identity is visibility, you will compromise. If your peace is dependent on response, you will constantly feel empty. But if you train yourself to obey without immediate reward, if you rebuild the muscle of anonymity, if you return to the altar daily, if you release the fear of being forgotten, then your power stops leaking. Your ministry becomes stable. Your peace returns, your joy returns, your clarity returns, because now you're not giving people the authority to decide whether your obedience matters. You're trusting the simplest truth. If God called you to do it, it mattered. So here's your challenge. One, next time you serve publicly, apply the 72. Horror Blackout Rule 2 this week. Do one nameless act of service and tell nobody 3. Starting tomorrow, lock the first -15 for 30 days forward. Starting today, commit to 21 days of the surrender statement ritual and watch what happens when you stop building a platform for approval and start building a life of obedience. Because the unseen is not punishment. The unseen is training. The unseen is where the real authority is forged. And when you can operate in the unseen with the same passion you operate in the scene, when you can serve without needing applause, when your heart doesn't crash when nobody claps, when your joy is anchored in obedience, you step into a quiet strength the world can't shake. That's unseen power. That's the quiet strength of your public ministry. When you really sit with that truth, when you stop rushing past it and actually let it settle, you realize how much of your exhaustion has nothing to do with workload and everything to do with misalignment. You're not tired because you're serving too much. You're tired because you're serving while secretly negotiating for validation. You're tired because part of your energy is always scanning, measuring, checking, comparing, wondering how it landed, wondering if it was enough, wondering if people noticed. And that constant background noise creates a low-grade anxiety that never shuts off. It's why you can finish a message, a post, a meeting, a service, and instead of feeling peace, you feel restless, unsettled, wired, but empty, because your nervous system never learned how to rest in obedience alone. And until that changes, no amount of growth, reach, or recognition will fix it, because the hole you're trying to fill was never designed to be filled by people in the first place. What makes this so dangerous is that it feels productive, it feels responsible, it even feels spiritual at times. You tell yourself you're just being diligent, just being strategic, just stewarding influence well. But if you're honest, if you strip away the language you use to protect yourself, you'll see that a lot of what you call wisdom is actually fear wearing discipline's clothes, fear of being irrelevant, fear of being overlooked, fear of wasting your potential, fear that if you're not constantly visible, you'll disappear. And fear is a terrible master, because it will push you to do things that look impressive on the outside while slowly hollowing you out on the inside. This is why God so often leads people he intends to use into seasons of obscurity, not to punish them, not to sideline them, but to detox them, to break the addiction to being seen, to separate obedience from outcome, to teach the soul how to stand upright without leaning on applause. Most people interpret hidden seasons as rejection, but they're actually protection. Protection from building a public life that the private life cannot sustain, protection from carrying influence before character is ready to hold it without collapsing. And if you're honest, you felt that tension already. You felt moments where things started to grow faster than your inner life. Moments where attention increased, but peace decreased. Moments where opportunity expanded, but joy shrank. Those moments weren't accidents. They were warnings, signals that something was out of alignment, signals that God was inviting you to slow down, to go deeper, to anchor yourself somewhere sturdier than reaction. Because here's the truth. Nobody likes to say out loud, visibility amplifies whatever is already inside you. If you're grounded, it amplifies stability. If you're insecure, it amplifies anxiety. If you're disciplined, it amplifies fruit. If you're dependent on approval, it amplifies fragility. And that's why so many people collapse right after the thing they prayed for finally arrives. The platform didn't break them, it revealed them. That's why the quiet work matters so much more than the loud work. That's why unseen obedience matters more than seen impact. That's why God pays such close attention to how you handle the hidden place, because the hidden place is the testing ground for whether you can be trusted when eyes are on you. If you panic when you're unseen, you will compromise when you're seen. If you need applause to stay faithful, you will eventually trade truth for approval. Not because you're evil, but because pressure always exposes the foundation. This is also why comparison becomes such a powerful poison in ministry. When your sense of worth is tied to visibility, other people's success starts feeling like your failure. Their growth feels like your delay. Their attention feels like your neglect. And slowly, without even realizing it, you stop rejoicing with others and start resenting them. You smile publicly and compete privately. You celebrate with your mouth and envy with your heart. And envy doesn't just poison relationships, it distorts calling. It pushes you to imitate instead of obey the copy, instead of discern to chase what's working for them, instead of what's assigned to you. But calling was never meant to be efficient in the worldly sense. It was meant to be faithful. Assignment doesn't always scale quickly. Sometimes it deepens quietly. Sometimes it looks small on the outside while doing massive work on the inside of you and the people you're serving. And if you can't honor that process, if you keep rushing it, forcing it, marketing it before it's mature, you may gain attention, but you'll lose authority, because authority doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being aligned. This is where the real shift happens, not when your numbers change, but when your relationship to numbers changes, when stats become information instead of identity, when feedback becomes data instead of validation, when growth becomes stewardship instead of self-worth. That's maturity. And maturity is what allows power to rest on you without crushing you. You'll notice something interesting when this shift starts to happen. You'll feel less urgency to explain yourself, less pressure to prove that what you're doing matters, less defensiveness when people misunderstand you, less desperation to be included, invited, reposted, recognized. You'll still care, but you won't cling. You'll still show up, but you won't chase. You'll still give your best, but you won't bleed for applause. And that internal posture changes everything. It changes how you speak. It changes how you listen. It changes how you respond to criticism and silence alike. Silence stops feeling like rejection and starts feeling like space. Space for God to work without interference. Space for seeds to grow underground where nobody can trample them. Because seeds don't grow faster when they're constantly dug up and inspected. They grow when they're covered, pressed into the dark, left alone long enough for roots to form. And ministry is no different. Roots first, fruit later always. If you skip that order, you may produce something, but it won't last. It won't endure pressure. It won't survive seasons where attention shifts or resources thin out. It won't carry others when they're weak, because it was never built from strength in the first place. So if you're in a season right now where things feel quiet, where the response feels muted, where your work seems unseen, resist the urge to panic. Resist the urge to overcompensate. Resist the urge to manufacture noise just to reassure yourself that you still exist. That urge is not urgency. It's insecurity knocking, and you don't have to answer it. Instead, ask a better question. Who am I becoming in this quiet? Not how do I get noticed faster, but what is being formed in me right now? Not how do I expand my reach, but how do I deepen my obedience? Those questions lead to strength. The other ones lead to burnout. And understand this clearly. God is not in a hurry with you. People might be, algorithms definitely are. Culture is addicted to speed, but formation takes time. Trust takes time. Capacity takes time. And anything that bypasses formation eventually demands payment somewhere else, usually through exhaustion, compromise, or collapse. When you stop fighting obscurity and start stewarding it, something subtle but powerful happens. Your prayers change. They get quieter, but deeper. Your motivation changes. It becomes steadier, less dramatic, more resilient. Your service changes. You're less concerned with how it looks and more concerned with whether it's faithful. And ironically, that's often when influence starts to grow in healthier ways, not force, not frantic, not fueled by fear, but carried by consistency. Because people can feel the difference between someone who is trying to be impactful and someone who is actually anchored. They may not articulate it, but they sense it. One feels loud and brittle. The other feels calm and weighty. One demands attention, the other commands trust. That's the kind of presence that changes rooms without raising its voice. That's the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. That's the kind of ministry that doesn't panic when seasons shift, because it's not built on trends, it's built on truth. So if you take nothing else from this, take this. Your power is not leaking because you lack gifting. It's leaking because you're still tying obedience to reaction. And the moment you break that tie through discipline, anonymity, surrender, and daily return to the secret place, you begin to reclaim something priceless, inner stability. And inner stability is the foundation of lasting public impact. Unseen power isn't loud. It doesn't rush. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It shows up faithfully, consistently, quietly, day after day, long after the applause fades. And when that kind of power finally steps into the light, it doesn't flicker because it was forged in the dark. That's the quiet strength of a public ministry that can actually endure.